Uh, the good news about having a two-session program is that the folks at the 7 o'clock show will probably show up about 8. And so you're here, if you're also going to be at the 7 o'clock, you got your seats. So you should have on your material something you put on your seat to say it's your seat. If you really like that seat, just hang on to it, and we'll remind people that there are folks already sitting in those seats. If you don't like your seats, steal somebody else's. So my name is Doug Freeman, and I am the CEO of Orange County Music and Dance, so it's my great honor and privilege to introduce our guest tonight. But before, I wanted to give you just a little bit of a look at what Orange County Music and Dance is all about, because it'll explain for you why we've invited Judy and Larry and Alan here, why this performance this evening, besides the fact that it's going to be phenomenal music. Besides that, you don't really need anything besides that, but there is a besides that. Besides that is that part of our mission here is to open the doors to the study of music, dance, voice, to all of our students here in Orange County, regardless of their ability to afford it. So about 40% of our kids today are unable to afford the kind of training and study that they're really entitled to if they want to pursue their passion, because it's expensive. There's so many things going on in everybody's families. It's hard to manage all of that. So when Charlie and Ling Zhang, who you will meet, they will be here shortly, when Charlie and Ling decided they were going to create a nonprofit community music school, the overriding urge that he had specifically was to make sure that the economic barriers to the study of the performing arts was removed. And his story is an interesting one. He's not here, so I can tell it and embellish it if I choose to. Charlie came here when he was 23 years old, Chinese immigrant. He had 20 bucks in his pocket and a clarinet. That's all he had. He spoke no English. When he arrived, he was admitted to the Pasadena Conservatory, but $20 doesn't go very far. In fact, it didn't pay the admission fee, much less the tuition. So he decided he would go work, and he went to work for a Chinese restaurant as a dishwasher. Figured maybe he could save enough money and then he could actually pay for music lessons. First week he was there, he sliced his finger and cut the tendon, and it eliminated his ability to play the clarinet. So the bad news is he couldn't play the clarinet. The good news is he couldn't play the clarinet because he stayed in the restaurant. In 2 years, 20 months, he saved up $7,000. Now, he was making $500 a month. I don't know how you do that. The answer is he got tips. He got tips. He got more tips because he was back of the house, but he brought food out to folks. He helped the waiters. He gave them tips on what to do. He didn't know. He didn't come from the restaurant. He just knew how to treat people well. So he got more tips than the waiters. And then he shared it with waiters, which gave him more tips. It's good. It's a good process. $7,000. He bought his first restaurant. And after he bought that restaurant, he bought a second one and a third one. And he ended up with 100 stores we call pickup sticks. Oh, yeah. I personally made him very wealthy. I know that. He sold that to TGI Fridays. He ended up investing in other businesses and other real estate, became very successful, and the more success he had, the more he yearned to give back to this country, which gave him the opportunities that he wouldn't have had in his homeland. When he began to think about what that was, what came back to him were kids and music. So he bought this building, created a nonprofit called Orange County Music and Dance, and he brought me out of a retirement that I was just dreaming about. So we've been open since January 2017. We have 430 students currently enrolled, plus another 80 to 100 students that we teach in the schools throughout Orange County, another 150 that we teach through clinics in dance and in instrument. We expect we'll go to 700 kids by the end of the year. Of our instrumental students, 70% of them are scholarship, and 66% of those scholarships are to recipients of free and reduced lunch programs, which means they're right at the poverty level, and their scholarships are 90%. So most of our kids at this school get some form of financial help, and that's a lousy business model, but the right mission. So you know, this school was built for kids who can't afford it. That's what's the truth. So 2 years later, here we are. We built up a pretty good classical instrument training program. You can walk down the hall and you'll hear people playing piano and cello and violin, flute, guitar, classical guitar. We felt it was time for jazz. And why we are having this conversation with Judy and Larry first is because we want you to hear why they chose jazz, what it meant for them in their lives and in their careers. We're launching a jazz program. It's all in your packet. I'm not going to take the time to explain it to you, but we're going to build a jazz program for the kids in Orange County, and we're going to get them ready for the jazz bands in their schools. We're going to launch them in dance and in voice and in instrument, and we're going to integrate all of them. So I'm glad you're here. Do you know why where those claps are coming from? Dancers. They're all over the place. Be careful. You might touch one and you'll start dancing. So I'm so glad you're here. Let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Judy Carmichael. Judy Carmichael tours all over the world. She's been a jazz artist for a lot of years. She has built a reputation that is so extraordinary. Most people who know jazz have heard Judy. Grammy nominated, multiple CDs that she's recorded, 2 books, her own autobiography. We've got some of those backstage if you're interested. After the concert tonight, Judy and Larry will be here to chat with you, and if you want her to sign books or anything, you go right ahead. So what you're going to hear from Judy is not just extraordinary music, but an extraordinary perspective on music. Larry Koonse. Anybody not know Larry Koonse? If you've been doing jazz for about a week, you know about Larry Koonse, one of the great jazz guitarists in the country, an extraordinary musician, trained at Thornton, USC Thornton, teaches at Cal Arts, which is where I spent 15 years, and though we missed each other, his reputation has preceded him here. So he's an amazing musician. He's multi-Grammy nominated. He's got, 200 CDs in which he has been a featured performer, plus his own. You're going to enjoy him. And building all of this together is Alan Chapman. If you've ever listened to USC, KUSC radio, you know Alan Chapman. Now, he's an MIT graduate. Says something about MIT. Okay. And has his doctorate in music theory from Yale. Says something about Yale. And he's a great jazz performer. Composer, pianist, and of course he's the voice of the radio. And also he leaves here tonight. He can't stay for the concert because he's got to go to the Pacific Symphony concert at Segerstrom, where he's going to be announcing. So we're thrilled that Alan came. He's here with his wife, Karen Benjamin, who is a renowned opera soprano, singer, and performer. So please welcome Alan, Larry, and Judy.
I play the part of Judy.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I want to thank the school for inviting me to do this, because this is as exciting for me as it is for all of you, I'm sure. And we have spent how many weeks working out exactly precisely what we would do?
It's a long time.
Yeah,
Long time.
No, in the spirit of jazz, this whole thing will be improvised. Starting with a question I would like to throw out, and I think this is especially basic for people who study instruments, and we talked a little about this backstage, that when you study an instrument, the idea is to play what's on the page and to play it accurately. When you play jazz, the idea is not to be on the page. You might be partially on the page, you might be varying degrees on the page, you might be completely off the page. So my question is, for each of you, where in your life did you get off the page?
I like the way you said that. Boy, that's really interesting. I guess for me, it was a specific moment, because I had very typical piano lessons. We were comparing our piano lessons when we were kids, what we both had. And I got into ragtime because I heard some of that, and I was playing that like the page pretty much. And then I got a job very close to here at the Balboa Pavilion. That was my first piano job, because I grew up here. And I was just really lucky. Someone came in and said, I think you're going to really like this. And it was just a sensitive listener. And he gave me a cassette of early Count Basie, before he was Count Basie, when he was still Bill Basie. And it was a tune, I remember it specifically. It was Prince of Wales with Benny Moten's band. And I went crazy. I just loved it. I thought I want to teach myself how to do it. So I didn't know anything about harmony or keys or anything. I just sat with that cassette, sat in a room and taught myself, picked it apart. So I was off the page completely. That completely changed my life. So it was a specific moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I grew up in a musical family. My father's a guitarist, and he's a jazz guitarist. And he used to play with Chico Hamilton, who was one of the first jazz artists that actually had a cellist in his group, kind of radical. Also included Eric Dolphy, great bass clarinetist. And played with Shearing as well, George Shearing. And I remember going on the road with him when I was about the age of 7. But my musical inclination started after hearing Andre Segovia at the age of 6. And I remember going home and thinking, I really want to do this. So he set up these classical guitar lessons for me. And I was fine playing on the page at that age, because, I was playing Bach, I was playing all these great pieces. So you can find yourself in those pieces as well. But when I got to junior high, we had a great jazz program at Eagle Rock High School. And a lot of my buddies were getting interested in this stuff called jazz. So for me, I came to this music from a social perspective. For me, it was a way to connect with my friends and share our identities, embodied in music. So that's how I came to it. It was a social experiment for me, finding that freedom with my friends.
It's so interesting. I'm just thinking about it as you're saying it was social, because mine was all about sitting in a room for hours. So mine was the exact opposite. Mine was sitting there in that room with that tape and going over and over with it, which you do, all jazz musicians do, but still, to start, that's really interesting.
Well, the aspect, the reason I bring the social aspect up is because it really is, there's a social dynamic to playing. I mean, there's communication, there's empathy, there's someone holding court while you accompany them. You know, there's all those things are in play. So that's what I love about this music.
Exactly.
The social aspect. So we're talking about acquiring the knowledge that there are things you must know. Now, I happen to know something about Larry, a distinction, as a matter of fact, the first to receive a jazz studies degree from the University of Southern California Thornton School of Music. So, I mean, that sounds like the Wild West days when people roamed the streets with 6 guns and somebody said, I think I'd like to get me a jazz degree. So what was that like?
When I first went to USC, first of all, the program was fantastic. And I was initially a classical guitar major and toying with the notion of maybe doing a double major, classical guitar and what they called studio guitar at that time. And that's when, in Los Angeles, it was really viable to make a living as a studio musician. There was tons of work. So as I got involved in the program, I got more interested in playing jazz. Again, the social aspect reared its head. And I also heard at that point some serious classical guitarists and knew that I would have to dedicate a lot more time than I had dedicated up to that point to really get on that level. So they were toying with having a jazz studies degree at that time. It was kind of in its initial phases. They didn't even have a curriculum, really. So I was kind of an experiment. And so they just threw it out there. You know, would you like to be the first person to get this degree? And it just felt natural to kind of go into that. Yeah.
So let me ask you then, you started really with your ear, right?
Yes.
You know, you didn't work. So how did you acquire all of the other knowledge? How did that happen?
It's really crazy. As I said, I got this job here, and I laugh about it because I only knew 5 tunes when I had my first professional job, and 4 of them were Maple Leaf Rag.
Okay, what was the 5th one?
Yeah.
The Entertainer?
I can tell you, I remember, no ballads. It was all memorized from the music, so I played Dizzy Fingers, Bumble Boogie, Maple Leaf Rag, Kitten on the Keys, and Nola. So they were all these things that I'd memorized when you and I were doing the John Thompson books. And so I had these things, so I had gotten great technique because those are all hard to play. And I played one song, and I was going to play on the other pianist's night off, so he never came back to hear me. He thought he inferred I knew 50 tunes or something. And so I started, once I got the job, I started trying, and I was just playing ragtime. And if a musician came in, I would ask him what key I was in because I didn't know. And then I started playing and seeing patterns. And I remember the day I actually first recognized how the chords all worked together, figured that out. Then I got that bassy tape and then started going more into jazz and saw that they were actually improvising and just started listening. For me, it was really meeting other musicians who came in and said, if you like this, you're gonna like that. And just a lot of listening and teaching myself.
And also intuition, right?
Yeah.
Intuition. You know, it's funny, I wasn't going to toss in a personal story, but you mentioned you didn't know what key you were in. Back when I was in school, and I got sent out sometimes to play piano and sometimes to play bass, because I played both. And there was a trumpet player. His name was Frank. And Frank, the trumpet player, would call out the key of the tune we're going to play. And so he called out the key of some tune, and it was not remotely the key that I was used to playing in. So I started playing it in the key that he said, and it was entirely wrong. It turned out that Frank was telling me his first note for a B-flat trumpet. So there was no way of deciphering exactly, unless you had a cryptography degree, exactly what was going on. But the whole notion is that you don't need the academic background, but you do need something. You need an awareness, you need an ear, you need intuition, and then there's a thing called, let's call it feel, or we could call it swing, or we call it feel, that not everybody seems to have.
Yeah.
So where does it come from? How'd you develop
I think it's interesting because it wasn't something that I realized till much later in my career, but I grew up obsessed with old movies. And as I said, I grew up here, and when I was a kid, you probably remember this, there was something called the $1 Million Movie, and they would play...
Channel 9, WOR New York.
Yep,
but
there
you got
you
it
go.
out here.
But it was the
Okay.
same things, and they would play the same movie exactly. So I am remembering that. So they play the same movie for 7 days straight, 3 times a day. So I would watch it every single time. And so I watched all the Fred Astaire movies. I memorized all those tunes. I'm dancing in front of the TV. So it's only many years later that I realized that when I heard that bassy thing, the reason it hit was because it was the jazz version of those early movies. And so it was, I did grow up in a way in the 30s, in those movies. And because I knew all those lyrics, I knew those tunes. And so for me, that's why I had the feel. And I think we were talking earlier when we were backstage that when my piano teacher was giving me lessons, she'd be mad because I would swing everything. And it's because that's what I felt. I was hearing this real swing feel. So that's how I got the feel. And then I started listening to lots of jazz. But that era, everything was jazz. You know, yeah. So for me, I think that's how it happened.
Well, the other thing, too, is that improvisation used to be a standard part of what we call classical training. You go back to the Baroque period and the classical period, especially in the Baroque. The idea is you don't have chord symbols, you've got figured bass, you've got a shorthand, you've got to create the part, you've got to listen, you've got to interact. Some fascinating stuff. Mozart, as a matter of fact, used to routinely, if he just finished a piece in the key of B flat, was going to play a piece in the key of D, he would improvise the connection. You wouldn't just leave B flat behind and go to D. So these are all skills that jazz musicians are required to have. And it's coming back into the mainstream a little more in academic classical circles, but not like it once was. Which leads me to a question for you, and that is, how do you see that intersection in your own life between the classical and the jazz?
Great question. You know, it's interesting to me because when I think of feel, the classical artists that I used to listen to, Horowitz and Heifetz and Julian Bream, it's all about feel. I mean, you can really sense the identity of the person, behind what you're hearing. So there's not much of a distinction other than maybe the fact that I can tap my toes on 2 and 4. I love the fact that you can feel that time viscerally when you're playing, and it's more of a, I guess visceral is a good word. There's more in classical music. There's a lot of expansion and contraction with phrases. And it's not usually felt in the same way as we feel jazz music, in that you feel this backbeat 2 and 4, and there's sort of there's a dance to that, and I feel it in the body. It's a body knowledge. It's not a head knowledge. It's a body knowledge. In fact, where I teach at Cal Arts, there's an African music program, and the African music program, I think, embodies rhythm in the deepest way that I've ever experienced. It's got all the complications of, Indian-based music, in that there's these incredible polyrhythms, but it's all taught from the sense of feel and sound. And I love that. Nothing's on the page. It's always three-dimensional. We had this master teacher at Cal Arts named Alfred Letsekpo, who was a chief from Ghana. And, I used to ask him about, this music all the time because I felt like a baby rhythmically compared to him. And he said, well, most Western notions of time are one-dimensional. They're all about placement. And time is so much more than placement. It's emotion, and it's how you shape the experience.
I want to say one more thing on the feel, too. I'm thinking, because I know a lot of classical players, because I get this a lot, and I'm sure both of you do, they want to play jazz, but they're not listening to any jazz. They just want to instantly play it. And even if they can figure out the theory of improvisation and memorize a lot of lines or scales or things, it's all about that listening and feel. And I know you've had it, I've had it. I played with a bass player in England that is great, named Dave Green, and this was years ago, and it was an out-of-body experience for me because his sense of time was so deep that I almost hurt myself. I was so excited. I kept taking chorus after chorus. I was like, yeah, more. And so I did it, and I thought, okay, I'm never going to be the same, but it's only going to happen when I get to play with Dave again. But then I came back to America, and the next gig I did with my regular guys, they were all like, what happened to you? And now it was in there. There was this different, I had discovered a different feel that went deeper. And so I say to all of you out there who have never played jazz but are interested in jazz, that it really starts with lots of listening and then just play simply. Don't, everybody goes to that fancy place. Go to the simple place and just try to play along and feel what's going on. And I loved you saying the body thing, because I had a piano player that wanted to hire me just to teach him how to swing, and I kept winding up massaging his shoulders to get him to just, get his,
Get him to loosen up.
Yeah, to loosen up. It was really, but I say that for those that want to learn it. Listening and getting that feel and trying to play with it. Don't you think that's true?
Absolutely.
No, I was taking one thing about contraction and expansion in classical repertoire, and that's for anybody who's studying. Of course, you're already not playing what's on the page, and the proof of that is you take your music publishing software, you create your score, and you say, I'm going to play it back, and you get it played back metronomically, and you say, well, that's the most horrible thing I've ever heard, of course. And nobody plays metronomically, whether you are aware of it or not. So there's already that freedom. And so everybody's a little bit off the page no matter what. Okay, so let's talk a little more about developing as a musician, or more importantly, I think we're supposed to also address the whole idea of forging a career path, because it's one thing to have the talent, it's another thing to have the ambition, it's another thing the enjoyment, but how do you go about that, especially in today's world where I guess, I hope we're past the point where everybody's saying, oh, jazz is dead, because to draw a parallel to classical music, I can't remember who said this, but one very esteemed writer said, the most consistent part of the classical tradition has been the consistent pronouncements that it's dead. Okay. Yes, okay. And that goes back into the Middle Ages when it's dead, and the piano's going to destroy music, and Beethoven's going to destroy music, and Debussy's going to destroy music, and the phonograph is going to destroy music, and iTunes, well, maybe. But anyway, and
we just keep going.
So the question is, it seemed to me that there was a time when jazz was not a magnet for young musicians, but it seems like, and I can't estimate how long it is now, it's probably at least a couple of decades, it's not only a magnet for young musicians, but you have those musicians for whom, time signatures, I mean, my son is a vibraphonist, time signatures that still boggle my mind are like second nature to them. What happened in the world? Is it the water or what? Or is
That
it
there's
food?
more jazz musicians
That there's
now?
more, and that there's more opportunity, it seems, and just such as A-level players in the population. What's up?
Well, I'm going to let you answer that specific thing, but one thing I'm going to say just about career, and you meet a lot of students because you're teaching and all of that, so you can speak to that. But I think when we went into what everybody's calling the gig economy, I was thinking, finally, those skills that we've had all these years, everybody's going to have to do that, And I say it in a positive way. We've had the successful jazz musicians I know, number one, have the skills. So that's it. And Larry has different skills than I do because he not only does his own work under his name, but he works with lots of other people, so he can play different styles and things like that. I bet everything on me in terms of my style, because I don't work for a lot of other people. Every time I go out on a job, it's always a Judy Carmichael job, meaning stylistically it's going to be my music. But that meant that I had to make a real commitment and say, how am I going to do it? I have to be even more entrepreneurial because no one's going to call me. It isn't like somebody's going to say, show up and play piano for me. I had to be great at creating opportunities. So I made a very conscious decision, and I think it applies to anybody in any field. You have to, what are my skills? Be realistic. What are my skills? And go forth with courage. Those, I think, the most successful lives. And I think that anybody now, if they think in that way, think what you enjoy doing, what am I good at, what will give me access to what I enjoy doing, and then go forth with courage. And I think that is the thing. But don't just sit around and think, I'm going to practice in my room and everybody's going to come to me, nor should they, because you develop other skills by reaching out. And I think those are very valid. And I mean, you really speak to that because you do so many creative things. And so that's my part for pursuing a career.
It's interesting, just to piggyback on what you said, Judy, younger musicians are more entrepreneurial than any other generation I've ever seen. I think it's because of the prevalence of social media, you know, YouTube being an easy way to sort of get the word out. I have a friend named Ben Wendell, who's a great tenor saxophonist.
Yeah.
You know Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ben's actually in town this weekend. He's playing at the Blue Whale Friday and Saturday with an amazing band. Ben's of a previous generation, previous to my generation, about 10 years younger. But Ben has basically single-handedly created his own career. You know, he's always a leader, and he's always booking these gigs himself and creating tours and putting those tours together. Actually, at this point, he has an agent now, and you know, and a manager. But it wasn't always that way. So I'm finding this new generation that they're really aware of all the possibilities, and they're taking advantage of it. It's a lot of work. But regarding what you said, Alan, I do think that this generation is up the game. It's amazing what they can do in odd meter and just the overall skill level. And I can only attribute it to all the information that they have access to now. Yeah, immediately.
No, I'm aware of the social media thing, and that's important for classical artists as well. There's a pianist named Valentina Lisitsa, who launched her career with an out-of-tune piano on a low-quality video on YouTube, and now she has hundreds of thousands of followers and a career. But I mean, the opportunities are there in a way that they didn't used to be. Of course, at the same time, there's a lot of noise out there.
Yeah,
you
and that's something
you
I
have
want
to rise above the above
And I
that
think you need to
landscape.
be realistic. I think that, and I say realistic, and I always say get someone around you that you know is great, that you admire, not your mother. Somebody who will be honest with you.
Although you do admire your mother.
Yes. Oh, I admire my mother, and it's nice that your mother supports you. But I think that the danger with all this social media and access, I try to watch these things because people like you. I have a radio show, and people will send me things. And somebody recently, it's epitomized in this, and she's beautiful, and she plays saxophone, and she sings, and so it was a video, and it was beautifully shot. I mean, it was like Scorsese. She just had everything there, and she's all sexy, and she was horrible, absolutely horrible. And I thought, she's probably about 26, 27, and I thought, the old guys, now we talk about it, Larry and I are very fortunate because we're the generation who's actually, when we were very young, the people who invented jazz were still alive. We got to meet a lot of those people. And I was thinking, if I had said to any of those people, if I'd said to Freddie Green, I'm thinking of making a film, he would have gone, you're not ready. You know, and you have to have it just because you can. And it shouldn't be fast. Sophisticated music takes a long time, and it should, to get good at it, whether it's classical, whether it's Brazilian, whether it's what we're doing. It's not something that's instant just because you can get yourself out there instantly. Maybe you shouldn't get yourself out there instantly. So that's my little word for that.
That prompts another idea, and that is that, and I know this is very important to you, that for many types of popular music, there is a prevalent style, and style awareness and style interest goes back maybe a few weeks and maybe a couple of years. But in jazz, the tendency is to embrace the totality of it. I know that was important to you, and especially when we hear you play, which I will insist both of you do before too much time goes by, that you were very committed to embracing the history. You know, and it is embraceable. We don't have to go back, you know, into all eternity. We go back to, you know, the beginning of the 20th century, and we find it happening. So, how did you go about schooling yourself in all of that? Yeah.
Well, for me, it was something that I connected because I was passionate about it. It wasn't even on purpose. It was something that I just, I heard ragtime, I liked it, and so I started with the beginning. Then I heard Basie, and that was the next thing, and then I sort of going through it. But I think one of the pitfalls, because you say the history of jazz is so short, you can embrace all of it, at least listen to it and be introduced to it. And I think, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, but I think of some of the people that we really loved, of those, like the second generation, we'll say Tommy Flanagan, Hank Jones, people like that, they had the depth of those early players. So when I'd hear somebody like a Tommy Flanagan, who was a great jazz pianist, but he wouldn't literally play stride piano and play like from the earlier things like that. But it was in there. You heard it. You know that he'd embraced it. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people think jazz started in 1965 or something. And it doesn't mean that you have to play it literally, the vocabulary, like I happen to be really into, but you should have listened to it and embraced what was that about. At least explore it a bit, I think, because I think it gives just more depth to everything. And so that, for me, I keyed in on what really spoke to me, and now I'm sort of working my way through the years because now I'm singing and stride doesn't work as well for my singing. So now I'm doing less. So I think you evolve naturally with what your ears are telling you, and that's a great thing about jazz too, because then you develop an individual style just by playing what you're hearing, what appeals to you. It will happen.
Am I piggybacking on you? Okay. So, yeah, I think it's important to go back in history, but I don't emphasize it as the end-all, be-all, because people are coming from so many different places. Like, for example, I found out about the music of Louis Armstrong relatively late. I was always a big fan of Basie, but the earlier small ensemble stuff for me was sort of a revelation later, you know? And it's beautiful stuff. I really love it. But I think the most important aspect in terms of the historical perspective on this music is to just understand how rhythm works. It's mainly rhythm-based, you know? The harmony and the melody actually existed almost with, you know, every classical, so many different classical composers that I can even cite, Ravel and Debussy, and even, you know, Gershwin was writing bluesy stuff. I mean, it's not that the harmonic and melodic vocabulary was completely new. It's mainly the rhythmic innovation. So, you know, to learn from the way these early jazzers played, Louis Armstrong, and then later on Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Bill Powell, Bud Powell. I'm thinking of a graduate or a teacher from Cal Arts. That's really the lesson, to understand the feeling of that music, the rhythmic aspect. I think that's the jewel.
Okay, so in the course of your last statement, you used the magic word that I was waiting for. You said the word stride. Okay, so since this is something which, this is a specialty, and a very special specialty it is, this is the point where I'd ask you to talk about that and demonstrate.
No, all right.
Is that okay?
That's great.
Right,
That's
okay.
great. Stride piano is something that, it's a vocabulary that I love, that really hooked me. That's what Basie was playing on that record that I heard. And it's called stride because the left hand is making a striding motion over the bass end of the keys. So it's going down to the bass notes and coming up. It's a very pianistically complete way of playing. So I'm playing the bass part and the rhythm part and the horn parts up here. So there's all these polyrhythms, which are really interesting. And we talk about the time feel. What's interesting with stride is that I'm doing all these things. I can be on top of the beat in one hand and behind the beat in another. So I can really play with all of these where the time feel is. And so this is the way everybody played jazz piano in the early years of jazz. So they used the term more as a verb. They wouldn't even say it's stride. They'd say, now that guy's really striding. So you were considered a really great player if you could make these huge, many octave leaps. So they'd say he's really striding. But people will refer to me as a stride pianist now because not many people do it. And so they'll talk
And
about
also that we should mention that that comes straight out of ragtime,
Right.
that it's built on that whole, which in turn comes from marching.
Exactly.
It's that 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
And then it just sort of the feel changed, and then stride
right,
became a little more swinging.
And to people who have not mastered it, like me, it is one of the most amazing things. It's sort of like, it's like shooting at a target 100 yards away and hitting it over and over, right? Yeah. So I think we got to hear some.
Okay, all right. Here we go. Oh, you're coming with me. Should we shut these off, do you think, or just
Let's just put it down.
we'll let him do
Well,
it?
actually, why don't you take it to the piano? There's a boom stand if you want to talk at all.
Oh, all right. Good thinking.
You're invited to play and talk.
Play and talk. Okay. All right. So
You play stride guitar?
he does.
Yeah.
Sort of. Okay.
Sort of. I'm going to take a little drink here. You got your notes. This is, so what I'm talking about is that I'm going back and forth like that, playing these bass notes. And and I think jazz is mysterious to a lot of people, because even people who've heard a lot of jazz, and if you sort of, I'll do a Super Bowl metaphor here, since that's coming up. If you think of me as the quarterback, the leader of the band is the quarterback. I call the play in the band, which would be the key and the tune and the tempo. And then we sort of go from there, because we call the play, and just like football players, they improvise because they don't know, maybe the quarterback plans on throwing it one way, but then someone else comes. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell, sometimes I tell him the tune, sometimes I don't. If I'm just, no, I'm going to tell him the tune. Why don't we do Honeysuckle Rose? And then we'll start out slowly. So this is all theme and variation. For those of you who aren't familiar with jazz, we're going to do a tune by Thomas Fats Waller. He was called Fats because he was 300 pounds, one of my favorites, and a very unusual figure in jazz, because he was not only a great pianist, he was a great singer, a great entertainer, and a great songwriter as well. And so we're going to start out, we're going to do a few choruses doing it slowly so you can really hear the melody, and then how we improvise with it, and then we'll see where we go. And at one point, something else that jazz musicians do a lot is they will, just like in any great conversation, if you're really communicating with someone, you'll find that you're sort of going back and forth and playing on each other's ideas. So we will do that, and we'll split up the tune, and we'll do something where not just play a full chorus one time through of a theme. We'll do something we call fours, where I'll play 4 measures and we're chopping up the tune, and then Larry will expand on my ideas and we go back and forth. So that's what we're doing there. All right, here we go. See, I can do it too. Yeah. We'll do fours in this tempo.
I think it's a Dire Straits song, Sultans of Swing, and there's one line in it, that's Guitar George, he knows all the chords, and I'm thinking you do know all the chords. And I just want to talk a little about harmony. And you mentioned, rightly so, that the basis of this harmony, tonal harmony, it goes back basically 1600. So but it's the additions and flavorings of the chords. And I was just thinking about, and also voicings, which is how you arrange the notes of the chord. But there's a special aspect also, which I have had the not always pleasant experience, when a pianist plays with a guitarist, it isn't always a happy experience. It isn't always happy. You either love it or hate it, but you two, it works out. And I was just wondering about, how
that happened?
how you got lucky. Yeah.
It is getting lucky. It is getting lucky. This is really interesting because he's saying something that's very true, and I know pianists who just love guitarists, like you work with Larry, and the same thing, or it just doesn't work at all because you have two chordal instruments, so that's what he's talking about. Lots of possibilities for clashing harmonically, and Larry was recommended to me, and I was going to be doing something in a club in Studio City, and we'd never met, and I said, that sounds great. And we met and we just started playing together and it just worked. And that isn't always the case. I mean, we've all seen magnificent musicians put together and it's just a disaster. And we really liked each other. I think even though, and I want you to speak to this, I'm gonna say sort of how I feel, but I think that even though Larry and I came at music in a different way in terms of our education and a lot of things, we still, the same things about music are important to us. And we love the same kinds of music, and we hear time the same way, and that's a huge thing. So we have loads of overlap and ways that we can do it, because we've never played this tune, but we just did this. That was all made up. And so he was watching me, he was listening, and Larry's much more flexible as a musician than I am. And so in this case, he's really coming to me. I'm setting the tone stylistically, but I'm coming to him in terms of feel. We're going back and forth with that and really listening to each other. So you speak to the here, because I'd be curious what you say about that. Oh, you have yours, good.
First of all, after listening to Judy, I'm sure you'll agree with me, she has this beautiful time center. You can't miss it. I mean, it's just swinging from the get-go. And so I think the number one thing is that we're both unified in that sense. We're feeling time. And that's what I was saying earlier about time being so important. So there's a lot of harmonic pathways that you can take to go to places. And Judy has a very authentic take on it. In fact, she plays a lot of repertoire that I'm not really familiar with. I'm sort of playing catch-up. But I just love it. And she plays it from the right harmonic and feel center. So for me, it's just a matter of sort of opening up my ears and and it's very conversational. So Judy's, she's giving me some literal cues. She's saying things verbally to me, but she's also doing a lot of gestural stuff. She's saying, take it. Yeah, cut.
She said you played
Yeah.
right off.
Exactly. So for me, it's very much like having a conversation. I trust Judy because her time center is so solid that really, even sometimes we can take different pathways to getting to certain places, much like Dixieland music, which that is the case. People are taking all these different melodic pathways to get to a place, and it's still part of the fabric of the music. So the key for me is being able to relax because I trust Judy. That's the biggest part of it.
And that's the same for me. You've got to play jazz music. I mean, it's the same in classical music, but I think in its own way, with jazz, because we are improvising, you really have to feel that you have somebody who's there for you, because the point is for us to push as far as we can, and we have to know that if we fall off an improvisational cliff, that the other person is going to keep going, and we feel free to do that with each other. And one of the things, like when I had Larry take a chorus by himself, that is because he can then not worry at all, not think at all about what I'm doing harmonically, and he can really open it up and do all these other things. And I'm always thinking about it, especially when there's just two of us, because we're composing on the spot, not just the notes, but I think a lot about texture. And that completely could refresh the ear of the listener. So if I stop playing and it's just one voice, then Larry, you're just hearing guitar, there's a nice contrast, plus he can go extend all the harmonies and go somewhere and then come back to what we're doing.
Yeah, you mentioning that this was something you just did for the first time together. Brings home something that is actually very special, and that is, unlike, say, let's say I'm a classical pianist, I walk in a room, there's a cellist and a violinist, I say, hey, you guys know the Beethoven Trio in C minor? You know, you can't do that. But you can name a tune, and chances are that, you know, there's a vocabulary of tunes. It's not just a vocabulary of chords and a feeling of style,
Right.
but you have vocabulary of tunes, and you know the standard keys, you know, and so pretty much, you know, if somebody says summertime, you know you're going to play it in A minor unless somebody
Right.
says otherwise. So that gets back to what you talked about, that there's that social aspect, that already there's a basis for the conversation, even if you've never met before and you've never played the tune together before.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, that was one of the things for me that I love, because this is considered a very solo style, and I think I'm the only stride pianist who ever existed who didn't want to play solo. I always wanted to play with other people
Yeah.
because I loved that social aspect and getting ideas from other people, feeding off of other
Yeah,
people. It's a
yeah,
lot more fun,
yeah.
at least it is for me.
Okay. Can you play another thing for us that you've never played together?
Well, that's pretty much everything.
If I could just piggyback on something
sure.
that Alan just said. The first time I played with Judy, we had maybe a half an hour to rehearse, and there were so many songs I didn't know. And Judy would sort of play them, and she has a clarity of playing that sort of teaches you really quickly, because she really is, it's very distinct. When she makes a motion in the left hand, you know exactly where it's going harmonically. So I was trying to be a quick study, but I was a little like the deer in the headlights when it came time to perform. But I was amazed at, you know, it's like, I think, an improvisational actor. If you just sort of relax in the moment, I mean, there's a tension to it. I like the adrenaline that comes out of, you know, like, oh my God, there's so many variables. This could be a disaster. You know, that feeling is actually kind of a nice feeling if you embrace it, you know. And in the moment, it was interesting because I just relaxed, and Judy's a good communicator. She has my back, and I just kind of opened up to her, and we made it work somehow.
Thank you for that. We could do you want to do a vocal and playing? That maybe we'll do something?
The music, though.
Oh, yeah, no, I just thought we'd just do blues. We just do that blues? Sure. This is we'll try something here. This is a blues that I wrote that I heard a wonderful phrase that somebody was talking about. It's a Texas phrase about if a man is a big bragger, but he has nothing to back it up, he's all hat, no cattle. And I thought that was fantastic. And my aunt is from Mississippi, and she was always using these great phrases, metaphoric phrases. If something unexpected happened, she'd say, well, even a blind hog gets an acorn now and then, things like that. So I was thinking, how about, because songwriting's relatively new for me, and I thought, how about with a blues you use an entirely different vernacular? You know, you can say, oh, that dirty dog, you can, all this stuff. So I thought I would see if I could put a lot of these phrases in a blues about this terrible guy who's very charming, but he goes out on his wife, it's all this, he's all hat, no cattle. And I first performed this recently in England, and my English musician stopped me and said, you know, we have a phrase for this, we have an equivalent. I said, oh really, what's it called? And it's all fur coat, no knickers. And I said, well, for an American, that actually sounds kind of sexy. So this is about that man that we've all met. All hat, no cattle. So I'll do the verse on my own. You're tall, you're handsome, but not much more. You run through women and keep the score. But baby, there's something you can't ignore. You're way too old to act like such a bore. A hat, no cattle, you don't come through. All bluff and bluster, you don't have a clue. so smooth and think you're the best. Stop your lying dog and give my ears a rest. You come on strong and act so fine. It's all so wrong, it's just a line. All show, no go. To you, it's just a game. You wonder why it all just seems the same. Your starts are fast, but so's the end. You say you're in love, but why pretend? You're all surface, nothing underneath. Quit catting round and give us girls relief. I had no cattle, all wax, no wick. You sure are slow, but think you're slick. You're flying high and claim you're having fun. It's all so great until it comes undone. I had no cattle, all foam, no beer. All talk, no action. Now listen here. You sleep around and say it's what men do. Guess what, pal? Your wife has just left you. She took the yacht, the kids, the house, and said your moves were Mickey Mouse. You're out of notes. I'd say your song is sung. And unlike you, her new man's really young. I had no cattle, and that's my view. When your heart aches, here's what you do. Take a risk and go for something new. Try real hard to be a better you.
All foam, no beer. Man, okay. Well, you've talked a bit, you've played a bit, and I thought maybe there might be some questions from the crowd. So they're here, they're ready to answer. Right there, yes. Here, use the microphone.
I'm a classical musician, but I've been listening to jazz my whole life, and I go to a lot of jazz. And I've always wanted to understand. So musicians are playing, and then one of them takes a solo. And it goes all over the place, harmonically, melodically, just all over the place. And everybody else knows, though, when it's done and when to come back in. How do you know that?
Okay, I want to address this. You don't always know. I know, you both know what I'm talking about. They can go on, and even the band can get bored. So that is where jazz can go very, very wrong. But in a great band, they take an appropriate amount of choruses, they know it, and everybody's following because you're playing with them. So you know the form, and many of the tunes now, in the case Larry's playing things that are a different kind of structure, but what we call the American standards, which are a lot of those tunes in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, many of them are 32 measures, and they have the same form, A, A, B, A. Very common for it to be that way. So we can hear that even if we don't know the tune, we will just say to each other, 32 bars, A, A, B, A. No, we can feel it, but you don't realize you could feel it. If we did a tune like I Can't Give You Anything But Love or something like that, you would just know. You'd feel when it's going to because it's in our bones from hearing those tunes for so long, especially for us. And then if it's one that has something unusual, we will say that. We'll say we're doing this tune, but it does something weird in the bridge. We warn them, and then we know. But that's how we know because we're playing along and we're following harmonically what's happening.
Yeah, when you asked, do you count, I think that's a great question. Because initially I probably counted. You know, I probably went 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. But then later on, as you play, you've done it so much through repetition, you understand what 4 bars feels like.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's, I think, what Judy was referring to, the feeling aspect of it.
And not only that, but generally the structure of the tune, what remains intact generally will be the harmonic structure. And so that's apparent. So you don't have to count because you hear
it,
where
yeah.
you are in the framework. Well, it's true that sometimes you can drift. You can drift a field, absolutely.
I mean, I've been totally lost. There was when I first started playing, I was afraid to play with bass players because very often the bass players would go off, or a drummer. Now, I really like drummers who keep the sense of the tune, but some drummers just go free. And then you really don't know unless they're going da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, and you're like, yeah, wah! No, so but it's very common for us to get lost too, so don't feel you're alone in there. I mean, we had that happen once. I'm laughing about it. I got so swept away the first time we played together. Larry did some beautiful introduction, and I got so swept away in the harmony, I wasn't thinking about where I was supposed to come in, and there's an audience there, and I don't know when to come in. And I said, man, I don't know if you remember this. I said, man, that sounds so beautiful. Do it again. You know? And I also had, I'll tell you, I did this once. I've never told you this, but I was playing with a different guitar player because Larry would never do this to me. And I was going to sing, and I was standing in front, so I wasn't going to play. And I said some tune, and I said A flat. And he started I don't have perfect pitch, but I have a great relative pitch, and it sounded really wrong. And he started off, and he's playing, and it sounded too high, and I sang it. It was too high. And at the end of the thing, he whispers, you know, I think that'd be better for you in A flat. He'd played it in B flat, you know, and so things like that can happen.
I don't know if you heard this joke, but I got to tell this joke.
Oh, good.
It's at a cocktail lounge, and the pianist, before they go out, says to the singer, look, when we do Over the Rainbow tonight, we'll start out in 4/4 as usual, but after 8 bars, I want you to go to 3/4, and then a bar of 2/4. Then I want you to go from B flat to C, and then I come down to A flat, then a bar of 7/8, a 2/3, and then into F. She says, I can't do that. He said, you did last night. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
More from the crowd. Yes. Okay, Okay, so the question was about
Yeah, about
the
2 and
relative
4.
primacy of 1 and 3 versus 2 and 4.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that somebody sent me a sign, that a musician friend sent me a poster that they'd seen that says, "Friends don't let friends clap on 1 and 3," which I thought it's hilarious. So no, we kind of have a joke about it because it's, which is what's making you feel like, oh my gosh, it has to be one thing or the other. It obviously does not have to be one thing or another. But in swinging jazz, there is more of that feel. You hear us count off a tune, we go 1, 2, So that's because that's that swing feel. But jazz musicians are playing lots of things in different kinds of feel, but that it's more that than going,
Yeah.
you know, that's not what you want to do. And that's the horrible thing that happens at a concert. We're swinging away and the audience goes, oh boy,
1, 3, 1.
you know, and you want to kill
yeah.
yourself. But the basic thing is that and plus what's bad in a big festival too is that the sound doesn't travel. So it's now
yeah.
coming in late and everything
Yeah.
like that. But in general, this kind of swing jazz, the emphasis is that on 2 and 4. So that's what they're talking about. And you speak to that because you play a lot more.
This question's
kinds of-
coming from a great pianist,
Ah.
Judy. This is Amy.
Hi,
Right?
Amy. All right, so you know
Yeah.
it. Okay, well then
Yeah.
then take this. Then
Yeah.
take it, boy.
So I think she probably already has her own answers, but
Oh, all
wasn't it
right.
Steve Martin in The Jerk that couldn't get 2 and 4?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
he was tapping
Yes.
his toe on 1 and 3.
That's right.
Actually, I don't think it matters feeling 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. I think it's the melodic, the tapping or the keeping track of is just it's sort of like a bean counter. It's just sort of a guide. I think it's the melody that contains the feeling. You know what I mean, of backbeat. Definitely,
Yeah.
What Judy's saying.
It's
this
not
backbeat.
being a slave to the beat.
It's
Yeah,
not being a slave to the
exactly.
beat.
You just reminded me
Yeah.
of a long ago story. I was at a cocktail lounge in Boston. I was playing piano, and there was a guy at the bar who was probably slightly inebriated, who was keeping time on his glass.
Oh, that's always wonderful.
So I just
yeah.
switched into 5, and I stopped him.
And I'll tell you very quickly, there's something that Larry, because he plays a lot of Brazilian music, will love. I was doing a master class in Brazil, and so I had a translator, and he was translating, and we were talking about time, and I was saying how respectful American musicians are, especially with Brazilian music, because the time feel is so different, and all of this. And I said, for instance, the big thing with Americans is this feel on 2 and 4, and I went like I just did with you. I said 1, 2, and I can't even help it. I subdivide the beat even when I'm
Yep.
when I'm doing it. So I even have a swinging way of snapping my fingers. So 1, 2, So I was doing that, and when the guy translated it, so all this Portuguese came out, and he said what I had said, but then he went, and I said, he illustrated what I was talking about because he was a Brazilian guitarist, and he immediately went into this kind of bossa nova, and he was trying to snap his finger, and he couldn't do it. It was fantastic. So it's so much inside of you. It's what Larry's saying about that.
We got time for a couple more? Right there, yeah.
Well, first of all, we first fell in love with you when you toured at Disney.
Oh, my word.
But
Thank you for remembering that.
we went to visit this gentleman in New York, and you were playing in Harlem. We found that out. And so just as we were walking through the door, for some reason, as a joke, you were playing It's a Small World, which I thought, oh my, we're in the Twilight Zone. It was because of you remember that. You know, it's a special. We went to see you in Ireland.
In Ireland? They're stalkers. This is... Oh, yeah, at Hanratty's. That was my first, they were talking about coming to see me in New York, if you couldn't hear that. That was my first job in New York. That was my debut in New York, so it was a big thing. And in fact, I worked at Disneyland for 5 years, and it's funny you say I was playing a tune because I'm quite proud of the fact, now you were the first graduate in the jazz program. I was the first woman instrumentalist ever hired by the Disney Corporation. Wow. They didn't have any women, so I was in a dressing room with 10 guys. No, I'm very proud of that. They had never had a woman, and so I would, my joke with the Disney tunes, because I worked 7 hours a day playing piano 5 days a week, and It's a lot of piano. And so, you really get sick of playing It's a Small World. And so they'd come over, they'd go, oh, they said, you're the one who plays all the Disney tunes. I said, that's the guy in Tomorrowland. And I would just send people away. So I did that whole time without playing Disney tunes. I was, would always do, I was naughty. But anyway, thank you for remembering me.
That's great.
Question.
Yes.
Because I know nothing about music, nothing about instruments. A lot of people travel with their instruments.
Yes.
They don't travel with-
No, and I'll tell you, that's a big challenge. It's a great question. And she's talking about the fact that pianists don't travel with their instrument. And it's one of the real challenges for a pianist. Steinway, I am a Steinway artist. I own a Steinway, and I prefer Steinway. I think it does make a huge difference. It's, I say, for another sports metaphor, I say it being like putting Tiger Woods on a miniature golf course. He'd putt really well, but he wouldn't bring out the big clubs. I can only do partially what I do if I'm on another piano. If I have a Steinway, the color range is much bigger, so I can get very, very soft. I can do all these things with dynamics. I hear differently. The touch is different. It's really a magnificent instrument. And for me, Steinway is here, and then the next piano is there. There's a huge, huge difference. And, but that said, I've played on lots of what I call PSOs, which are piano-shaped objects. And I find that playing on pianos, I use this as it's very much a blind date for professional piano players. We show up, we don't know, and then some I've had, I meet it and I think, okay, I'm just going to get through this evening. We don't like each other. It's not going to be fun. Some, it'll be a beat-up old piano, and I think, it's really nice. You were probably better when you were younger. And I'll bring you around. I'll coax you to it. We'll get through this together. And so that's what it is. It's a challenge, but it's all part of what you bring to it. It's what pianists do. That's what we do.
I'm sure you know the story that Art Tatum, who was blind, would go to a club and listen to the person playing ahead of him and mentally diagnose what notes to avoid, things like that.
Well, he was a show-off.
Well, but still, a handicap player.
No, I played him when notes are missing. I used to,
Well-
Dorothy Donegan.
Well, my absolute
She used to-
story that I don't think can be beat. It was an early morning professionals group. I was there with my wife Karen, and it was like, I don't know, 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. We were supposed to perform for them, but there was a guy who played piano while they went to their breakfast buffet. And hearing this guy play, I realized something very horrifying at the piano. No dampers. No dampers. You hit a note, and it sounded until it was done. And I stood there thinking, what's going to happen? So do you have anything that even comes close to that?
Oh, well, I started to say there was a magnificent, some of you will know, woman, great jazz pianist named Dorothy Donegan. She was a big woman, huge technique, but she destroyed pianos. And there was a time in my late 20s, early in my career, where I followed her all over Europe. So she'd play for a week, and I'd play the club the next week. And there would be keys missing. She'd actually broken the keys. Because she came a bit out of vaudeville, so she'd play, but then she'd just sort of be swept away with music. She'd get up and she'd dance and she'd sit on the piano, just like crash it. You've seen films of her. And so she would do this. And so after this, it was the Dorothy Donegan tornado that had come through. And so years passed, and I was quite flattered. I was asked to do a concert with her, be on the same bill in New York. And when they called me, I said, okay, of course I'll play first, right, because she's this huge star. And he said, yes. I said, now, when Dorothy finds out I'm on this, she's going to want to go first. I said, so I'm putting it in my contract. I'm going, because I wanted the piano to be in shape. Plus, following Dorothy was like following a circus act. I mean, she was just unbelievable. And so, she's a hero of mine, but it was all this other stuff. So anyway, fine. But then I get a call from Dorothy, Judy, and we're doing that concert. I'm so, yeah, great. And she goes, I have to play first. And she went into a whole thing, and I said, oh, I'd love to, but I lied and said I had another gig that I had to go to get first. But that was the thing. She completely destroyed pianos. So I have had that. And that's hard because you're trying to keep changing keys while you're trying to avoid middle F.
Right. Yeah. So last question goes to you. Aren't you glad you travel with your own guitar?
Yes.
Well, we promised we'd finish it by 5:30 because you got work tonight.
We do.
No, so thank you so much for everybody coming.
Thank you for
Hope you
coming.
enjoyed it today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy and Larry.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Al.
I want to thank Alan. We're going to see Larry and Judy back, but Alan and Karen, thank you guys for coming. They're on their way to the symphony now. It'll be beautiful. A little boring, but it'll be beautiful. It's all, it'll be spectacular. Scheherazade. I mean, it's going to be an amazing evening. But we get,
Yeah, you can
Pretty-
come over here.
pretty good stuff here. Alan, thank you so very much.
Thank you,
And-
Alan.
And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that would like to get something to eat, the cafe is open. They're going to have some dinner up there, so feel free to go up. And you got an hour. I would come down here about 6:30 to get your seat in case someone gets the idea that maybe your seat is really available to them. So, thank you. Well, you can leave your papers, so people know you're there, and we'll have someone down here to try to keep people from